The mark on oak 47 was perfect. That was how Miss Isobel Henslow knew it was false. On Wednesday, the 15th of September, 1852. Elmstead Park had been dressed for inspection as though an estate might be persuaded to conceal its wounds beneath striped awnings and polished silver. Tea steamed from urns on the south lawn. Auction catalogues passed from gloved hand to gloved hand. Landowners discussed acreage, foresters inspected bark, and timber buyers looked past the house, toward the eastern wood, with the patient hunger of men calculating how much profit could be cut from a living thing. Isobel stood slightly apart from them beside Lady Edith Tremayne, neither servant nor guest in the eyes of society, but something more convenient and less clearly honored. A gentlewoman companion whose judgment was welcome until it became inconvenient. She held a small linen-bound herbarium against her skirt. Its worn cover had belonged to her late aunt, as had the pressed apple blossom, resting between its first two pages. Lady Edith leaned closer as Mr. Theodore Mordaunt finished explaining the timber salvage schedule to a cluster of gentlemen. "You've gone still," she murmured. Isobel kept her gaze on the oak before them. "That tree isn't dying." Oak 47 rose beyond the edge of the lawn, broad-crowned and steady, its leaves still dense despite the first turn of autumn. The bark was sound. New growth showed pale at the tips of several branches. Yet a fresh crown and H had been struck into the trunk, marking it for the Hatherleigh salvage lots listed in the catalogue. Mr. Mordaunt's voice carried pleasantly across the gathering. He was a solidly built man of 47, precise in dress and manner, with the public gravity of one who expected his statements to be treated as facts. "Storm damage has weakened several of the eastern oaks," he said. "Removal now will prevent greater loss by winter." Isobel stepped off the clipped grass. Lady Edith followed, though more slowly. Near the base of oak 47, a small flake of bark lay where the hammer blow had split it free. Isobel crouched, careful not to brush her skirt against the damp earth, and lifted the fragment between her fingers. The impression showed part of a crown. Every point was intact. Beside it, almost too small to notice, curved a faint crescent burr. She had seen Hatherleigh's official marking hammer during Lady Edith's annual orchard inventories. The right point of its crown had been missing for years. This mark could not have been made by it. Isobel opened the herbarium, slid the bark into a folded parchment sleeve behind the blossom page, and closed the cover before the breeze could disturb either object. "Miss Henslow." Mr. Mordaunt had approached without haste. His smile did not reach his eyes. "That belongs to the estate." "It was lying loose upon the ground," she replied. "Then you'll hand it to me." He extended his palm. Isobel did not move. "I'll hand it to the vendor's solicitor in the presence of the auctioneer." Conversation thinned around them. Lady Henrietta Mortimer arrived first, graceful in dark green silk, her expression touched by amusement. As patroness of the County Agricultural Society, she had mastered the art of making dismissal sound like instruction. "Surely we needn't turn a scrap of bark into a tribunal," she said. "Miss Henslow knows fruit trees, I believe. That doesn't make a companion a forester." "No," Isobel said, "but a healthy crown, sound bark, and fresh growth do make a healthy oak." Mordaunt's pleasant expression hardened by a degree. "You're suggesting fraud before an auction." "I'm suggesting the mark deserves inspection." "By whom?" Lady Henrietta asked. "Someone whose livelihood doesn't depend upon the answer." A few gentlemen looked away. Others looked toward the Duke of Hatherleigh. Nicholas Tremayne had been standing near the catalogue table with two landowners who had spent the previous quarter-hour questioning the condition of Hatherleigh's accounts and the wisdom of Mordaunt's timber contract. He was 40, tall, composed, and known for a wit sharp enough to rescue a dull dinner or wound an adversary without raising his voice. Today that wit had the brightness of a blade held too tightly. He crossed the lawn as Mordaunt reached again for the herbarium. "You'll not take a lady's property from her hand, Mordaunt," Nicholas said. The contractor stopped. It was the smallest defense possible, and Isobel understood its limits at once. Nicholas had protected the book, not believed the woman holding it. His gaze moved from the herbarium to the oak, then to the bark dust beneath the mark. For one suspended instant, she saw recognition in his face. He understood the objection. He knew enough of his own estate to remember the broken point on the official hammer. Then, one of the landowners behind him said, "Is this how Hatherleigh certifies salvage now?" Another added, "Perhaps His Grace's companion knows his woods better than his contractors." A ripple of laughter followed, thin but dangerous. Nicholas's jaw tightened. Isobel watched the choice arrive in him before he made it. He could permit the question and risk appearing ignorant before men already measuring his debts, or he could restore order by placing the woman beneath it. "The bark should be examined," Isobel said quietly. "If the mark is genuine, no harm is done. If it isn't, enough." The word cut across the lawn. Nicholas's tone remained controlled, almost courteous, which made what followed colder. "Miss Henslow, know your place." The gathering became still. Even the auctioneer lowered his catalogue. Isobel felt the insult, not as heat, but as a sudden absence of sound, as though the whole estate had drawn one breath and waited to see whether she would beg for room inside it. She looked at Nicholas. His eyes stayed on hers. Her hand did not tremble around the herbarium. That seemed to trouble him more than tears might have done. She understood then that he had heard her reasoning and silenced her anyway. Not because she had failed to make sense, but because sense had become socially expensive. Isobel inclined her head. Then she curtsied with the exact grace Lady Edith had once praised as impossible to improve. "I believe I shall." She turned before anyone could mistake dignity for permission to continue. Lady Edith said her name, distressed and low, but Isobel gave the older woman one reassuring glance and walked across the lawn alone. No one stopped her. Behind her, Mr. Mordaunt resumed, speaking too quickly about storm rot. Lady Henrietta's laugh sounded brighter than before. Nicholas said nothing, yet Isobel could feel his gaze between her shoulders until the carriage door closed. Only then did she release the breath she had held. The carriage rolled away from Elmstead beneath a sky the colour of old pewter. Isobel set the herbarium beside her, opened the auction catalogue, and turned past the timber parcels to the page, describing the full estate lot, house, orchards, cottages, eastern wood, and every standing tree not lawfully conveyed before completion. Her aunt's inheritance had been called unsuitable money by women who enjoyed its fruit and ignored the hands that had cultivated it. Isobel had spent years allowing other people to decide what such money and such knowledge permitted her to become. For the first time that day, the future did not look like a door closing. It looked like land. She took a pencil from her reticule and wrote one sentence across the margin for her solicitor. "Bid for the whole of Elmstead. Don't stop at the woods. By 10 o'clock the next morning, every respectable person within 12 miles had heard that Miss Isobel Henslow intended to bid for Elmstead Park. Half believed it impossible. The other half came to the Market Town Assembly Room to watch her fail. Cane chairs stood beneath high windows clouded by September light. At the front waited the auctioneer, the vendor's solicitor, and the ledgers that would turn rumor into contract. Printed particulars rustled through the crowd. Gentlemen spoke of acreage and drainage. Ladies spoke more softly, but with greater interest, of Isobel's inheritance, which had expanded overnight from an unsuitable connection with trade into a subject worthy of calculation. Isobel sat beside Mr. Wetherell, her solicitor, in a plain dark blue walking dress. The linen-bound herbarium rested in her reticule. She had slept little, yet her hands were steady. Lady Edith occupied the chair on her other side and regarded anyone who stared too openly with the calm severity of a woman born into rank and no longer impressed by it. "You're certain?" Lady Edith asked. "I was certain before I entered the carriage yesterday," Isobel replied. "Today only makes it expensive." Mr. Wetherell concealed a smile behind the catalogue. "I'll bid exactly as instructed. If the price passes your ceiling, I'll stop. You'll stop at the ceiling, not 1 guinea beyond it." Across the aisle, Lady Henrietta Mortimer leaned toward Mr. Theodore Mordaunt. Mordaunt stood behind a thin gentleman Isobel did not recognize. The stranger held no catalogue of his own. He waited only for Mordaunt's smallest movement, a proxy. Then Nicholas Tremayne entered moments before the auctioneer called the room to order. Conversation lowered around him. He wore no visible sign of haste, but restraint showed in the set of his shoulders. His gaze found Isobel at once. She met it. He did not look first at Mr. Wetherell, her gloves, or the reticule holding the evidence from Oak 47. He looked at her face, as though searching for some sign that yesterday's wound had weakened her resolve. Isobel gave him none. Neither smiled. Nicholas took a place near the rear beside Hatherleigh's head forester. He had come, rumour said, to purchase Elmstead's western woods, which bordered his own land, and would supply timber without distant transport. Isobel wondered whether he meant to oppose her. She would not ask. The first lots were cottages, meadow parcels, and 2 tenant farms. Bidding rose and fell without drama. Then the western timber rights were announced separately, subject to any prior agreement disclosed by the vendor. Mordaunt's proxy lifted his catalogue. Nicholas did not. The proxy bid twice against a Bristol merchant, then stopped when the price exceeded ordinary salvage value. Isobel watched Mordaunt's mouth flatten. At last, the auctioneer announced the principal lot. Elmstead Park would be offered as a whole, including the house, home farm, cottages, orchards, eastern wood, and every standing tree not lawfully conveyed before completion. The room sharpened. Mr. Wetherell began with a measured bid. Another came from a land speculator near the windows. A third came from Mordaunt's proxy. The figures climbed by hundreds of pounds. Isobel listened without moving. Each rise removed some imagined future and clarified the one she had chosen. At the rear, Nicholas watched the proxy, then Isobel, when the bidding passed the figure at which Hatherleigh might reasonably have entered. The head forester whispered to him. Nicholas answered too quietly to hear. He never raised his catalogue. The speculator withdrew. Mordaunt's man continued. Mr. Wetherell answered. The proxy answered again, though sweat shone at his temple. Isobel looked at her solicitor. One more. Mr. Wetherell lifted 2 fingers. The auctioneer repeated the sum. Silence followed. Mordaunt leaned toward his man, but the proxy shook his head. A second passed. Then another. The hammer struck wood. Sold to Miss Isobel Henslow, through Mr. Wetherell. A breath moved through the room like wind through dry leaves. Lady Henrietta turned fully in her chair. Mordaunt went pale beneath the controlled brown of his complexion. Nicholas remained still. Isobel rose when the vendor's solicitor beckoned. She crossed the room beneath every stare that had followed her departure from Elmstead the day before. At the front table, Mr. Wetherell reviewed the memorandum of sale. Isobel signed where indicated and authorized the deposit from the inheritance account already placed at his disposal. When she set down the pen, she felt Nicholas's gaze again. This time there was no contempt in it, and no easy wit. There was recognition. He had expected wounded defiance, perhaps. He had not expected preparation. Isobel held his eyes for one quiet moment, then turned to the vendor's solicitor. "I want written confirmation that no standing timber is to be disturbed while title is examined." Before the man could answer, Mordaunt stepped forward. "That won't be possible." He produced a folded paper from his coat. The principal oaks were conveyed under a pre-sale timber license. They belong to my syndicate regardless of today's result. Mr. Wetherell extended a hand. Mordaunt gave him the paper. It was a copy, not an original. The schedule named Oak 47 among the salvage lots. "Where's the executed license?" Isobel asked. "In secure keeping." "Whose keeping?" "That's not your concern. It concerns the contracted purchaser of the estate." Mordaunt's proxy edged toward the door. Lady Henrietta rose and joined them with an expression of patient disappointment. "Must this become another display, Miss Henslow? You've won your little triumph. I've entered a contract. That's not the same thing." The vendor's solicitor examined the copy. "Until the original is produced and verified, I can instruct that no disputed tree be felled or removed." Mordaunt's eyes hardened. Hatherleigh men are already engaged to begin cutting. His Grace's authority stands behind the license. Nicholas crossed the room before the final word had settled. "No," he said. Mordaunt turned. Nicholas's voice remained even, but the wit was gone. "No worker will use my name or authority to enter Elmstead while the license is disputed. No Hatherleigh wagon will remove so much as a branch until the vendor's solicitors examine the original. Your Grace, the delay will cost. Then the cost is mine to consider." Nicholas looked toward the vendor's solicitor. "Put it in writing. I'll send the same order to my forester before noon." The head forester inclined his head from the rear. Mordaunt folded the copy with unnecessary care. Lady Henrietta said, "You're allowing an accusation to govern an estate contract." Nicholas glanced at Isobel. "I'm allowing the contract to be examined before anyone profits from it." Isobel did not thank him. "You've done what the law and your own name required." "Yes," he said, without resentment, "I have." It was the first thing he had said to her that did not ask her to become smaller. Mr. Wetherell requested the object found at Oak 47. Isobel removed the herbarium from her reticule and opened only the parchment pocket. She tipped the bark flake onto a clean sheet placed by the vendor's solicitor. The auctioneer examined the partial crown impression and the tiny crescent burr. In their presence, the flake was enclosed in a fresh parchment sleeve. The vendor's solicitor folded it, applied wax, and signed across the fold. The auctioneer added his name. A receipt stated that Isobel would retain the sealed sleeve until it could be deposited with a neutral custodian. She placed it back inside the herbarium. Mordaunt watched every movement. When the formalities ended, he offered Lady Henrietta his arm and guided her toward the door. Near the threshold, he bent close enough that only she and Isobel, standing several feet away, could hear. If those trees remain standing until completion, the whole arrangement may come apart. Lady Henrietta did not look back. Then see that they don't remain undisturbed. The first wagon reached Elmstead before 8 o'clock on Saturday morning, and the second followed before the mist had lifted from the eastern wood. Isobel saw them from the temporary estate office, where the vendor's solicitor had allowed her to review inventories during the examination of title. 2 heavy timber wagons rolled through the outer gate behind a dozen cutters, carrying ropes, wedges, and long-handled saws. Mr. Mordaunt's foreman rode at their head. He did not remove his hat when Isobel stepped onto the drive. "You're early," she said. "We were told to begin today." "By whom?" "Mr. Mordaunt." The foreman drew a folded notice from his coat. "The timber license gives immediate right of removal." Isobel did not reach for the paper. She had learned the previous day how easily a copy could be displayed, as though the absence of an original were merely a social inconvenience. The vendor's solicitor suspended all cutting while the license is examined. "Mr. Mordaunt says the suspension has no force against a prior conveyance." Behind him, the cutters began unloading tools. One of the wagons turned toward the eastern wood. Isobel stepped into its path. She did not own Elmstead yet. The fall of the auctioneer's hammer had made her the contracted purchaser, not the legal proprietor, and she would not weaken her position by pretending otherwise. She held up the written notice Mr. Wetherell had delivered at dawn. This instruction comes from the vendor's solicitor, who still controls the estate pending completion. It states that no disputed tree is to be felled or removed. The foreman glanced at the seal without dismounting. "Hatherleigh supports the contract. Does His Grace know you are here?" "His Grace's men are here." Several cutters wore Hatherleigh work coats. That fact had been chosen carefully. Mordaunt had not merely sent labourers. He had sent the appearance of ducal authority. Isobel looked toward the house. Lady Edith had already dispatched a groom to Hatherleigh Court. But 5 miles could feel like 50 when men had arrived with saws. "Until the solicitor's notice is withdrawn," Isobel said, "you'll keep every tool on the wagon." The foreman laughed once. "You may have bought a promise, Miss Henslow, but you haven't bought the ground under your boots." "No, the vendor still owns it, and the vendor has forbidden you to cut. Stand aside." The nearest wagon horse shifted, leather creaking across its broad chest. Isobel remained where she was. She did not raise her voice. "If you proceed after receiving written notice, every man here will be named as a witness to the trespass dispute." The word witness moved through the cutters more effectively than a threat. 2 men lowered the saw they had begun to lift. The foreman's face tightened. "You think a paper and a lady's tone will stop work ordered under a duke's name?" Hoofbeats sounded beyond the gate. Nicholas came through at a hard but controlled pace. Lady Edith's groom behind him and Hatherleigh's head forester following on a second horse. Nicholas dismounted before the groom could reach his bridle. He took in the wagons, the tools, Isobel standing in the drive, and the Hatherleigh coats among Mordaunt's men. "Who authorized this?" he asked. The foreman straightened. "Mr. Mordaunt, Your Grace, under the timber license." "Did he show you the original?" "He said it was secure." "That wasn't my question." The man hesitated. "No, Your Grace." Nicholas turned so every worker could hear him. "Mr. Mordaunt does not act under my authority in this matter. Any Hatherleigh employee who crosses into the eastern wood before the vendor's solicitor lifts his suspension will be dismissed. Any wagon bearing my mark will return to Hatherleigh now." The foreman looked toward Isobel as though she had somehow arranged the humiliation. "Your Grace," The delay will affect the sale. Then the sale will be effected. Nicholas faced the Hatherleigh men. Unloaned nothing. Take the wagons home. No one argued. Ropes were secured again. The horses were turned with slow, reluctant obedience. Isobel watched Nicholas sacrifice the appearance of certainty before the very workers whose confidence helped sustain his authority. It did not repair what he had done. It did, however, cost him something. The distinction mattered. When the last wagon rolled beyond the gate, Nicholas approached her. His expression held no trace of the brightness he wore in drawing rooms. "May I see the bark?" Isobel removed the linen herbarium from her reticule. The sealed parchment sleeve rested inside, still signed across the fold by the auctioneer and the vendor's solicitor. She did not hand over the book. She opened it herself and lifted the sleeve free. Hatherleigh's head forester joined them. He was a weathered man named Mr. Cole, with hands stained by years of sap and iron. "The official hammer has been chipped for 7 years, Your Grace," he said. Right point of the crown broke when the old tool chest was dropped during the north yard repairs. We never replaced it because the impression remained identifiable. "And it has stayed in your custody?" Nicholas asked. "Locked except when used. I hold one key. The steward holds the second." Isobel angled the sealed sleeve toward the pale light. The fragment within showed enough of the crown to make the difference unmistakable. Nicholas reached to steady the lower edge as the parchment shifted in the breeze. His fingers brushed hers. The contact was slight, no more than warmth across 2 knuckles, yet both went still. Isobel felt the awareness pass between them with an honesty neither had invited. Nicholas released the sleeve at once. He stepped back rather than using the accident to claim greater nearness. "The crown is complete," he said. Mr. Cole nodded. "It shouldn't be. Then someone used another hammer, or altered an old impression," the forester said. Isobel studied the tiny curved defect beside the crown. "The crescent burr appears in the fresh edge of the blow. Whatever made it struck this bark recently." Nicholas looked at her. There was no challenge in his expression now. "You were right to stop the cutting. The solicitor's notice stopped it. You stood in front of the wagons because the men were ignoring the notice." Yes, he accepted the correction without defense. Mr. Cole carried the sealed sleeve only as far as the estate office, where Isobel placed it back inside the herbarium. No transfer of custody was made. The written receipt remained valid, and the object stayed with her. By noon, the Hatherleigh wagons had returned across the boundary. Nicholas asked to speak with Isobel in the office, while Lady Edith and Mr. Cole remained within sight through the open door. "What I said on Wednesday was wrong," he began. "I understood your objection. I remembered the chipped hammer. I also knew the men around me were beginning to question whether I understood my own contracts. I chose to silence you rather than expose my uncertainty." Isobel rested one hand on the closed herbarium. "That's an explanation. It isn't an excuse." "No, I'm sorry." The words were simple. He did not soften them with charm. Isobel believed he meant them, which made her answer more difficult, not less. "You shamed me before a public gathering." "I know. A private apology may be sincere, Your Grace. It cannot correct what everyone there learned from your words." Nicholas looked toward the doorway, where sunlight caught the edge of the deserted drive. "They learned that I would use rank when reason became inconvenient." "Yes." He met her eyes again. "Then I'll have to teach them something different." Isobel did not promise forgiveness. Nicholas did not ask for it. He turned to Mr. Cole and gave the order before leaving Elmstead. Every Hatherleigh timber lot marked under Mordaunt's supervision, was to be suspended until each tree could be checked against the official hammer and the original records. The decision would delay income needed before winter. It would invite questions from creditors. Nicholas issued it anyway. That afternoon, at Hatherleigh Court, Mr. Cole unlocked the timber tool room. With his key, while the steward used the second, Isobel attended at Lady Edith's request and under the vendor's solicitor's written authority to observe matters affecting the disputed license. The official crown and H-hammer lay inside the chest beneath an oilcloth wrap. Its handle was worn smooth. The right point of the crown was visibly broken. Mr. Cole pressed it into a block of soft pine. The mark emerged cleanly but incomplete. Nicholas stood beside the table, his face unreadable. The tool that should have marked oak 47 had never left its locked chest. Yet the oak bore a perfect crown. Somewhere, another hammer existed, and someone had made it for a purpose. By Wednesday morning, the 22nd of September, Nicholas had learned that a formal call could feel more dangerous than a room full of creditors. Isobel's temporary lodging stood on a quiet street in the market town, a furnished house chosen because it placed her within reasonable distance of Elmstead, Mr. Wetherell's office, and the vendor's solicitor. Lady Edith received him in the front parlour with tea already poured, and an expression that made clear he had been admitted by Isobel's permission, not by the automatic privilege of his title. Isobel sat beside a small writing table. The linen-bound herbarium rested near her hand, still holding the sealed parchment sleeve and the bark fragment from Oak 47. Nicholas did not look at it for long. He had come to discuss the future, not to claim the evidence. "Your Grace," Isobel said, "Miss Henslow." He placed his calling card on the tray, though everyone in the room knew who he was. The gesture mattered because form mattered, and because he was beginning to understand that respect was often built from the things powerful men considered unnecessary. "I'm told you have terms," he said. "I have safeguards." She pushed a written paper across the table. "They apply only until conveyance is complete, and the disputed timber license is resolved." Nicholas read the first line. No cutting would take place before completion. The second required every disputed tree to be sketched, numbered, and witnessed. The third kept Hatherleigh and Elmstead inventories separate. The fourth required 2 witnesses for any future mark. The fifth placed disputed evidence with a neutral auction official rather than either estate. He read the page again, more slowly. "You've left very little room for discretion. Discretion is what Mr. Mordaunt has been using. Fair." He looked up. "You don't trust Hatherleigh's records." "I don't trust any record that depends upon one man's private control, including mine, especially yours, if you can alter the rules merely because they are inconvenient." Lady Edith lifted her teacup to conceal what might have been approval. Nicholas took out a pen. "Then I won't alter them." He signed beneath Isobel's name. The paper made no romantic promise. It did something more difficult. It acknowledged that her judgment did not require his approval to become valid. "One more point," Isobel said. "I won't serve as your unofficial advisor. If Hatherleigh requires consultation after I become proprietor, it will be requested formally and recorded. You believe I might ask for your knowledge while leaving your position undefined. I believe society has done exactly that for years." Nicholas did not deny it. "Then I recognize you as Elmstead's future neighboring proprietor, not as a member of my household, and not as Lady Edith's extension." "Thank you." That sounded dangerously close to gratitude. It was acknowledgment. Don't grow accustomed to it. A flicker of his old wit returned, but this time it did not cut. I'll try to bear the disappointment. Lady Edith set down her cup. Now that neither of you has drawn blood, the vendor's agent is waiting at Elmstead. The orchard lay beneath a pale autumn sun, its grass silvered where the morning dew had not yet dried. Isobel walked with the vendor's agent and Lady Edith several paces ahead of Nicholas and the two foresters. The inspection was not private. Every pause, measurement, and observation had witnesses. That was precisely what Isobel intended. They began with the older apple rows where several trunks leaned under the memory of years of harvest. Isobel noted canker on one branch, healthy graft unions on another, and a neglected drainage channel that could be cleared without cutting a single sound tree. Nicholas listened more than he spoke. When he did ask a question, he addressed it to her directly rather than turning to the men beside him for confirmation. Near the edge of the eastern wood, a storm-fallen trunk blocked the path. It was not high, but the ground beyond it dipped sharply, and Isobel's walking dress limited the length of her step. Nicholas came beside her, then stopped before touching her. "Will you allow me?" He offered his hand. The question was quiet enough that only Isobel and Lady Edith heard it. Isobel looked at his open palm. 2 days earlier, his fingers had brushed hers over the sealed evidence, an accident neither had chosen. This was different. He was asking. She placed her hand in his. His grip closed only enough to steady her as she stepped over the trunk. Warmth passed through her glove, restrained and unmistakable. He released her as soon as both her feet were secure. No lingering pressure, no claim disguised as assistance. "Thank you," she said. That one was gratitude. Don't grow accustomed to it. His answering smile was brief, but it altered his whole face. For one dangerous instant, Isobel saw not the Duke who had silenced her, but the man who might yet learn to wait for an answer. She turned toward the trees before the thought could become permission. Oak 47 stood less than 50 yards away. The perfect crown mark remained visible in the bark. The tree was as sound as it had been during the auction inspection. Around its trunk hung a rectangular brass tag stamped E47, secured by 2 square nails. Isobel crouched to examine it. "This wasn't mentioned in the vendor's general inventory," she said. The agent checked his papers. "It appears in the timber schedule as storm salvage. The tree hasn't fallen." Nicholas looked upward through the healthy spread of branches. "Nor is it likely to." One of the foresters scraped lightly at a patch of bark below the tag. "No rot here." Isobel studied the brass plate. It hung slightly crooked. Beneath its lower edge, half concealed by moss, were 2 empty nail holes. She cleared the moss with the end of a pencil. The holes were older than the nails currently holding the tag. "It has been removed and replaced," she said. The vendor's agent frowned. Why would anyone move a number from a living tree and then return it? Perhaps the question is where it went while it was gone. Nicholas's gaze shifted toward the eastern track, broad enough for a timber wagon. Mordaunt controlled the numbering, and the catalogue describes this tree as salvage before it was sold. Isobel said. She sketched the tag, the current nails, and the older holes in her field notes. Nicholas watched her work without leaning over her shoulder. When she finished, a mounted messenger approached from the direction of the market town. He carried a folded notice bearing the seal of the County Agricultural Society. Lady Edith opened it at Isobel's request. Her expression hardened as she read. "Lady Henrietta has ruled that Elmstead produce may not be entered in the county show. She says Miss Henslow has not yet completed title, and therefore cannot submit as proprietor. The judging isn't until the 29th of October, Isobel said. Completion should occur before then. Nicholas held out his hand for the notice, and Lady Edith gave it to him. He read the wording twice. The society rules permit a contracted purchaser to submit if completion occurs before judging. Lady Henrietta chairs the committee, the agent said. She has influence over every vote. Nicholas folded the notice. She has influence, not the right to invent a rule. Isobel met his eyes. I don't want a special exception. You won't have one. That afternoon, he sent a written response to the committee, citing the existing language and using his vote only to require that it be followed. He did not demand that Isobel's exhibit win. He did not ask that her name be protected from scrutiny. He insisted only that the same rule applied to her as to every man who had purchased land under contract before a show. By evening, the committee withdrew its exclusion. Yet beneath Oak 47, the 2 old nail holes remained. The brass tag had been taken away once and placed back again. Somewhere between those acts, someone had needed the tree to carry another identity. On Thursday, the 14th of October, Elmstead Park ceased to be a promise written in an auction memorandum and became Isobel Henslow's estate-in-law. Mr. Wetherell arrived shortly after breakfast with the completed conveyance, the vendor's solicitor, and 2 witnesses who signed where the parchment required. Isobel read every page before she placed her name beneath the final declaration. No applause followed. No fashionable observer was present to turn the moment into spectacle. Lady Edith stood beside the library window, smiling through tears she pretended were caused by the autumn light, while the old housekeeper waited near the door with a ring of household keys resting on a salver. When the last seal had been impressed and the witnesses withdrew, the housekeeper stepped forward. Elmstead is yours, Miss Henslow. Isobel looked down at the keys. They were not symbols of rescue. No duke had placed them in her hand. No guardian had restored what had been stolen. She had purchased the estate with money earned by generations of nursery work and preserved by the aunt who had taught her that roots could survive contempt. Isobel lifted the keys from the salver. Then we'll begin by learning what it needs. The work started before luncheon. She moved through the estate office with the steward, the orchard master, and Mr. Wetherell's clerk. Every standing tree already bore a number in the old inventory. But many descriptions had been altered by Mordaunt's salvage schedule. Isobel ordered a fresh account. Each orchard row would be recorded separately. Healthy grafts would be preserved. Diseased limbs would be pruned only after inspection. No whole tree would be felled because one branch had failed. Every piece of removed timber would receive a written receipt stating where it had grown, why it had been cut, and who had witnessed the removal. That will slow the work, the steward said. It will slow theft more, Isobel replied. Several labourers who had worked under the former management waited outside the office, uncertain whether a new proprietor meant dismissal. Isobel asked for their names, duties, and years of service. She retained those whose work had been sound, including 2 men who had once followed instructions from Mordaunt's foreman. You won't punish them? Lady Edith asked after the last man had gone. For obeying orders they had no reason to question. Isobel closed the ledger. No, but they'll know that future orders must be written and witnessed. The wages owed from the previous quarter presented a harder question. 3 orchard workers claimed arrears. Isobel did not empty a purse across the table to appear generous. She asked Mr. Wetherell's clerk to compare their statements with the old wage book. By noon, the missing entries had been confirmed. Payment was authorized that afternoon. "Kindness without accounts becomes vanity," Isobel said when Lady Edith praised her, "and accounts without kindness become an excuse." She moved into the principal bedchamber before evening, though half the cupboards smelled of dust and the chimney smoked, until the housemaid opened a stubborn flue. The imperfections pleased her. Elmstead did not need to pretend it had never been neglected. It needed honest repair. 2 days later, Nicholas arrived with Hatherleigh's head forester and the official Crown and H hammer wrapped in oilcloth. He came by appointment. His calling card was presented before he entered, and Lady Edith remained in the drawing room while the examination took place in the adjoining estate office with both doors open. Mr. Cole never surrendered custody of the hammer. He carried it himself, placed it upon the table, and kept the tool within reach. Isobel brought out her field notes from Oak 47. The sealed bark fragment remained inside the linen herbarium, under the written receipt made at the auction. She did not open the sleeve. Instead, she showed Nicholas the sketch she had made before the evidence was sealed. The drawing marked the complete crown and the tiny crescent burr beside it. Mr. Cole pressed the official hammer into a block of soft pine. The resulting impression showed the H clearly, but the right point of the crown was absent. The defect was not subtle. No one could mistake one for the other, Nicholas said. "Not after seeing them together," Isobel replied. "Most people never expected to see them together." Mr. Cole turned the hammer in his hands. This tool made every lawful Hatherleigh mark for 7 years. If another crown is complete, another hammer exists. "Can a damaged point be repaired?" Nicholas asked. "Not without changing the face. This one hasn't been altered." Isobel compared the pine impression with her drawing. "The crescent burr matters as much as the crown. A duplicate tool may have been poorly finished at one edge." Nicholas looked toward the wrapped herbarium. "And the bark still carries that curve?" "Yes, the auctioneer and vendor's solicitor saw it before sealing." "May I see the book?" The question surprised her more than it should have. He had asked before touching her hand at the fallen trunk. Now he asked before approaching an object more private than any estate record. Isobel placed the herbarium on the table, but kept one hand over the cover. "You may see the blossom page, nothing beyond it." "I understand." She opened to the first pressed flower. The apple blossom had faded to ivory, its petals thin as old paper. Beneath it, in her aunt's hand, ran one line of ink. "A tree is known by what it bears, not by the place assigned to it." Nicholas read the sentence without speaking. He did not reach for the following page. He did not ask what other memories the book contained. His gaze remained on the faded blossom and the words beneath it. "You carried this at the inspection," he said. "I carry it often." "Then you had those words in your hand when I told you where you belonged." Isobel did not spare him. "Yes." His face tightened, but he did not turn the pain into performance. "I thought I was protecting order. You were protecting yourself from embarrassment." "I know." He looked at the note again. "Your aunt understood more about rank than most men born to it. She understood cultivation. Rank was only one of the weeds." A shadow of humor touched his mouth, but he did not laugh. "I deserved that. It wasn't offered as punishment. That may be why it reached me." Isobel closed the herbarium. The sealed bark sleeve remained inside, undisturbed. Nicholas watched her fasten the worn linen tie. There was something newly careful in the way he regarded the book, as though permission had revealed more than possession ever could. Mr. Cole rapped the official hammer again. He carried it back to Hatherleigh that same afternoon, returning it to the locked tool chest under the same two-key custody. No transfer was made to Elmstead. Before Nicholas left, a groom arrived from Winchester carrying a notice addressed to Miss Isobel Henslow, proprietor of Elmstead Park. The title on the envelope stirred a small warmth in her chest. The contents extinguished it. A timber buyer announced that a shipment listed as Elmstead salvage lots had been entered for display at the County Agricultural Show on the 29th of October. The notice included preliminary lot numbers and requested confirmation of Isobel's reserve price. She read it twice. "I've authorized no timber shipment." Nicholas took the paper only after she handed it to him. His eyes moved down the list. "This was submitted before your conveyance completed." "By Mordaunt's office?" Isobel said, pointing to the notation at the foot of the page. Mr. Cole leaned closer. "And those aren't ordinary lot numbers." Isobel saw it then. One of the entries was E47. Beside it appeared the Hatherleigh Crown designation. The living oak at Elmstead had been listed as salvage under her estate's number and the Duke's mark. Nicholas folded the notice with deliberate care. "I'll send written instruction that no Hatherleigh mark may be used on Elmstead timber. Send it to the show committee, the timber buyer, and every Hatherleigh yard," Isobel said, "not only to Mordaunt. You think he'll ignore a private order? I think secrecy has served him too well already." Nicholas met her eyes. "Then there will be nothing private about it." After he left, Isobel carried the notice to the estate office and placed it beside the new inventory. Outside, the orchards stood in ordered autumn rows, their fruit nearly gathered, their branches plainly alive. Somewhere, a shipment was being prepared under Elmstead's name, and whoever had arranged it expected the world to believe that a living thing was already theirs to cut. On Tuesday, the 19th of October, Nicholas arrived at Elmstead with a leather dispatch case, 2 copied timber schedules, and none of the easy confidence that had once made every room seem arranged for his convenience. Mr. Wetherell's clerk accompanied him, as did Hatherleigh's head forester, while Lady Edith sat in the adjoining morning room with the connecting door left open. The official Crown and H hammer remained locked at Hatherleigh under its two-key custody. The sealed bark fragment remained inside Isobel's linen herbarium beneath the written receipt made at auction. Nothing important had moved without record. Isobel appreciated that before Nicholas said a word. He set the dispatch case on the estate office table and waited until the clerk had opened it. "These are copies of every Hatherleigh timber schedule prepared under Mordaunt's supervision during the past 18 months, he said. "The originals remain in the estate office." Mr. Wetherell's clerk certified each page against them this morning. "You've brought all of them?" Isobel asked. "Not the pages I thought might help. All of them." That distinction mattered. Isobel drew the first volume toward her. Nicholas took the chair opposite rather than beside her, giving her both space and a clear view of every document. For 2 hours, they compared Hatherleigh's salvage numbers with records of fallen trees, storm reports, and wagon movements. Several lots described as damaged oak had no corresponding fall in the forester's daybook. Others listed quantities larger than the trees named could have produced. The numbers did not fail dramatically. They failed by small, careful degrees, the kind designed to look like clerical inconvenience rather than theft. "This one," Isobel said, placing a pencil beneath lot H19. 3 mature oaks recorded as storm-fallen in August. Where are the forester's reports? Mr. Cole checked his book. There aren't any. Could the trees have fallen on a tenant holding? Nicholas asked. Then the tenant would have signed for removal, Isobel said, and the cartage entry would name the holding. The copied schedule named only Hatherleigh Yard. Nicholas's expression tightened. They moved to the toll house records. The original bound register remained in the toll keeper's possession. But Mr. Wetherell's clerk had obtained a certified extract covering the relevant weeks. One entry appeared repeatedly after dark. A blue timber wagon registered to Mordaunt's contracting yard. It travelled between Hatherleigh's lower gate and the road leading toward the county agricultural show storage barn. Each passage recorded the driver, the axle count, and the toll paid. None described the cargo. That is unusual, Isobel said. Not unlawful by itself, the clerk replied, but loaded timber wagons are usually identified because the toll differs by weight and purpose. Mr. Cole leaned over the page. Mordaunt's blue wagon can carry 2 full oak beams if properly balanced, or smaller lots under another estate's number, Isobel said. Nicholas looked toward the window, where Elmstead's orchards stood in ordered rows beneath a thin autumn sky. The show storage barn is outside the grounds. Goods can arrive before the exhibitors and be entered under whatever description accompanies them, Isobel replied. The unauthorized Elmstead shipment notice did not begin with the show committee. It began with someone who expected material to be waiting there. Nicholas returned his attention to the register. Mordaunt. Likely. Not proven. You still protect the distinction. Because accusation without proof is the weapon he used against the estate before I ever owned it. The words were quiet. They struck him more deeply than anger would have done. Mr. Cole and the clerk withdrew to the adjoining records room to compare dates, leaving the office door open. Lady Edith remained visible beyond the second doorway, reading correspondence by the fire. Nicholas sat with both hands resting on the table. For several moments he said nothing. Isobel did not rescue him from the silence. At last, he spoke. My father left Hatherleigh with obligations he never allowed anyone to name plainly. His voice had lost every trace of performance. Mortgages on unentailed property. Repairs postponed until walls began costing more than pride. Tenant roofs patched twice where they should have been replaced once. When I inherited, everyone expected me to know how to correct 20 years of concealment before luncheon. Isobel closed the schedule, but kept her hand upon it, and Mordaunt offered speed. He offered cash from timber that appeared already lost, storm salvage, diseased oak, dead value turned useful before winter. Nicholas gave a bitter, restrained laugh. It sounded almost virtuous. No raised rents, no dismissals, no public admission that a ducal estate could be badly managed. So you accepted his classifications too readily. He looked at her. When you challenged the mark at Elmstead, the men around me were not merely questioning a contractor. They were asking whether I understood my own land. I was afraid the answer was no. It was no, Isobel said. He did not flinch. Yes, the honesty changed the room. I used wit because it has always allowed me to appear in command before I have earned it. Then I used rank when wit was not enough. I made you disappear so no one would see my uncertainty. You tried to. You are right. Understanding why you did it does not restore trust. I know. The answer came without protest. Nicholas lowered his gaze to his hands. I am not telling you this so you will comfort me. Good. I am telling you because if I hide the fear, I leave the same door open for it to govern me again. Isobel studied him. This was not the private apology of 4 weeks earlier, offered with pain, but still shaped around the injury he wished to repair. This was something less polished. He had named not only what he had done, but the weakness that made repetition possible. Nicholas slowly turned one hand palm upward on the table. He did not reach across the distance. He asked nothing. The gesture remained there, vulnerable precisely because he had left the choice entirely hers. Isobel looked at the open hand, then at his face. She remembered his fingers brushing hers over the sealed parchment, and the careful way he had released them. She remembered the fallen trunk when he had asked before offering support. Trust had not returned whole. It had begun, instead, in separate acts that could still be withdrawn if they proved false. She placed her hand in his. Nicholas closed his fingers gently around hers. No pressure urged her nearer. No possessive thumb moved across her glove. They sat in silence while autumn light shifted over the copied schedules between them. His hand was warm, steadier than his voice had been. "Whatever these records reveal," he said, "I will not bury it to protect Hatherleigh." Isobel held his gaze. "Even if the finding damages your credit?" "Yes." "Even if it proves your contract enabled the fraud?" "Yes." "And if the truth embarrasses you before the same people who heard you silence me?" A pause. "Then, especially then." Something within her eased, not enough to be cold forgiveness, but enough to permit hope without insulting caution. She let their hands remain joined for another moment, then she withdrew, and Nicholas released her at once. He nearly spoke again. She saw the words gather in his expression, something personal and unguarded. But he stopped before sentiment outran what he had earned. Mr. Cole returned carrying the certified extract and one newly matched date. "The blue wagon passed the toll house after midnight on the 12th, he said. That was the night before Mordaunt's office submitted the preliminary Elmstead shipment notice. Nicholas stood. "Then we begin with the driver." Before arrangements could be made, a groom entered with a printed notice from Winchester. The county agricultural show would open on Friday the 29th of October and continue for 2 days. Isobel's orchard exhibit had been accepted under the rule. Nicholas had compelled the committee to honor. At the bottom of the notice appeared the list of judges for estate improvement. Lady Henrietta Mortimer chaired the committee. Lady Edith read the name over Isobel's shoulder. "She will control the order of inspection, the witnesses admitted to the enclosure, and every question put before the judges. Then we must arrive with records she cannot dismiss as private opinion," Isobel said. Nicholas looked at the toll house extract, and with the driver of the blue wagon, if he can be persuaded to speak. 9 days remained before the show. Somewhere between Hatherleigh Yard and the storage barn, timber had travelled at night, without a cargo description. Isobel had followed the numbers far enough to see the shape of concealment. She had not yet seen what Mordaunt intended the county to believe when the doors opened. By noon on Friday, the 29th of October, the county agricultural show had become a small city of canvas, polished harness, livestock pens, machinery stands, and striped exhibition tents spread across the fairground outside Winchester. Farmers compared drainage tools. Landowners discussed breeding lines. Ladies moved beneath parasols between tables of preserves, needlework, and autumn flowers. At the far side of the grounds, beneath a long awning reserved for estate improvement, Isobel's Elmstead exhibit stood ready for judgment. Baskets of late apples were arranged beside grafting. Samples, pruning records, and a clear hand-drawn plan showing how each living tree could be numbered, inspected, and removed only under witnessed authorization. Nothing in the display was ornamental without purpose. Even the fruit had been weighed and entered by variety. Lady Edith remained near the exhibit with Mr. Wetherell's clerk, while Elmstead's orchard master answered practical questions from two neighbouring stewards who had begun the morning sceptical and stayed to examine Isobel's receipts. Nicholas arrived before the judges. He greeted Isobel formally. "Miss Henslow." "Your Grace." His eyes moved across the exhibit and paused on the empty place where Elmstead's timber demonstration should have stood. One wagon had left the estate before dawn, carrying sample boards, numbered tags, and a small frame showing the new inventory method. It had not arrived. "Still no word?" Nicholas asked. "None. I've sent a groom back along the Winchester Road. So has Mr. Wetherell." Isobel kept her voice level, though unease had pressed at her since the wagon failed to appear. The driver knew the route. The harness was sound. The load was light. Then, delay is unlikely to be accidental. Unlikely isn't proof. Nicholas accepted the correction with a slight inclination of his head. Their conversation ended when Lady Henrietta Mortimer approached at the head of the judging committee. Her dark plum walking dress was severe enough to suggest impartiality and costly enough to announce power. Mr. Theodore Mordaunt walked several paces behind her, carrying a catalogue of timber entries as though no suspicion had ever touched him. "Miss Henslow," Henrietta said, looking over the fruit and grafts. "How industrious. One might almost forget how recently you acquired the land." "The trees haven't forgotten who neglected them," Isobel replied. One judge coughed to conceal amusement. Henrietta's smile thinned. "We'll begin with the timber method when your wagon arrives. If it arrives." The committee moved to the neighbouring exhibit. Nicholas remained near Isobel, but he did not offer false reassurance. "I can have Hatherleigh boards brought within the hour," he said quietly. "No, the entry is Elmstead's." "Yes." He did not ask again. A murmur rose near the eastern gate. Heads turned. An Elmstead wagon appeared between two show stewards, but neither Isobel's driver nor the expected sample frame accompanied it. The horse was being led by a stable boy from the storage barn. Across the wagon bed lay a single heavy oak beam. Its cut surface was pale and recent. Burned deep into one side was a perfect crown and H. Below it, fixed by two square nails, hung the brass tag marked E47. Isobel felt the world narrow to the beam. The tag had belonged to Oak 47. 3 days earlier, it had been attached to the living tree in Elmstead's eastern wood. Now it was fastened to cut timber bearing Hatherleigh's mark and displayed on her missing wagon. Henrietta returned before Isobel reached it. "What is this?" she asked, though satisfaction flickered beneath the question. Mordaunt pushed forward with practiced alarm. "That beam is Hatherleigh oak." Nicholas looked once at the mark. "The crown is complete." "Exactly," Mordaunt said. He turned so nearby exhibitors and buyers could hear. "Miss Henslow has been questioning Hatherleigh's marks since the auction. Now, Hatherleigh timber appears on her wagon under an Elmstead number." Isobel stepped beside the beam. "Oak 47 is alive. You say so. You inspected it. I inspected a marked salvage tree." Mordaunt pointed toward the tag. "This is the same number you claimed belonged to that oak. Perhaps your objections were preparation. Learn the mark, move the tag, and present stolen timber as proof of a fraud that never existed." The accusation traveled through the crowd faster than any formal announcement. a timber buyer withdrew his hand from the beam. One of the judges whispered to Henrietta. Isobel saw the story forming around her. Not merely theft, calculation. A woman with knowledge of marks and records had used that knowledge to manufacture evidence. No one is to touch the wagon, Isobel said. The beam, the tag, and every fastening must remain as found. Mordaunt laughed. You don't command the showgrounds. The show steward does. She turned to the nearest official. Seal the wagon under neutral custody. Record every person present. Henrietta lifted one gloved hand. Before we indulge her instructions, her carriage and personal effects should be searched, if she has tools capable of making this mark. No. Nicholas's voice carried across the enclosure. Henrietta faced him. Your Grace, Hatherleigh property has been found in her possession. A disputed beam has been found on a wagon that disappeared before reaching the grounds. That is not consent for anyone to search Miss Henslow's person, her carriage, or her private belongings. Then you are protecting her. I'm preventing accusation from becoming license. He looked at the show steward. The wagon should be sealed. So should the beam and tag. No one from Hatherleigh, Elmstead, or Lady Henrietta's committee should hold sole custody. The steward nodded and called for wax, cord, and 2 clerks. Mordaunt's confidence faltered, but only briefly. And the herbarium, he asked. She used it to conceal the bark fragment. Isobel met his gaze. The bark fragment was sealed by the vendor's solicitor and auctioneer. It remains under written receipt. Then produce it. I will produce it to the show steward, not to you. Lady Edith brought the linen herbarium from Isobel's locked exhibit case. Isobel opened only the parchment compartment. The sleeve inside remained sealed, both signatures intact across the fold. In view of the steward, Nicholas, Lady Edith, and 2 committee members, she transferred the sleeve into a small evidence box. The steward recorded the movement, locked the box, and retained the key. The herbarium returned to Isobel's hands without the bark fragment. Nothing else was surrendered. The beam and tag were corded to the wagon, and wax seals were applied across the knots. One clerk recorded the perfect crown. Another noted the 2 old nail holes visible beside the tag's current fastenings. The impression on the beam resembles the impression visible through the sealed bark sleeve. The steward said, that proves only that the same kind of tool marked both. Or the same tool, Isobel replied. The crowd had grown. Buyers, exhibitors, and servants stood beyond the ropes. Henrietta looked toward the judges. Until this matter is resolved, Miss Henslow's entry cannot remain under consideration. My fruit and grafting records have nothing to do with the beam. Isobel said. Her reputation does, Henrietta replied. Nicholas stepped nearer to Isobel. His voice lowered, but not enough to make the exchange private. Withdraw the exhibit for now. She turned to him. No, Isobel, listen to me. It was the first time he had used her given name without invitation. He seemed to realize it an instant too late. If you remain, Henrietta will turn every question into spectacle. Leave the judging until we know who moved the wagon. It will spare you further ridicule. The old wound opened with terrible precision. Nicholas believed he was protecting her. Once again, when uncertainty threatened Hatherleigh, his answer was to remove Isobel from view. You promised to accept what the records revealed, she said. I will. But first you want me absent, only until my dignity is convenient. His face changed. That isn't what I mean. It is what you've asked. Around them, the committee waited. So did the buyers. Isobel faced the show steward. I do not withdraw Elmstead's exhibit. Suspend judgment if your rules require it. Keep the evidence under seal. Record that I requested neutral custody before anyone searched or altered the wagon." The steward wrote. Isobel looked at Nicholas. Her voice did not rise. "I will not make myself invisible so that your uncertainty may appear dignified." She left the judging enclosure, but she did not leave the fairground. Lady Edith walked beside her. Behind them, Nicholas remained where she had placed the truth in full public view. Near dusk, as the crowds thinned, a young carter approached him behind the storage barn. The boy's face was pale with fear. "Your Grace, I saw Mr. Mordaunt at Elmstead 3 nights ago." Nicholas went still. "Where?" "At the Eastern Wood. He took the brass tag off the living oak himself. On Saturday morning, the 30th of October. Nicholas returned to the county agricultural show before the first judges entered the estate improvement enclosure. The sealed wagon still stood beneath guard, its oak beam bound in cord and wax, the brass tag E47 fixed where everyone could see it. The evidence box, containing the sealed bark fragment, remained in the show steward's custody. Isobel's herbarium had been returned to her the previous evening, lighter by one object, and heavier with the knowledge that Nicholas had once again mistaken disappearance for protection. She stood beside her exhibit with Lady Edith and Mr. Wetherell's clerk when Nicholas approached the committee table. Lady Henrietta Mortimer was already there, speaking with 2 judges in a low, assured voice. Mr. Theodore Mordaunt had not appeared. Nicholas did not ask for privacy. Before judging resumes, he said, "The record must be corrected." Henrietta turned. "Your Grace, the committee hasn't yet reached a determination." "This concerns my determination, not yours." The nearby exhibitors fell silent. Nicholas faced the clerk, who kept the official minutes. "Yesterday I asked Miss Henslow to withdraw her exhibit while the accusation was examined. That request was wrong. It was made by me alone, and it mustn't be treated as evidence against her." Henrietta's expression sharpened. "You were attempting to preserve order." "I was attempting to spare myself a public conflict and calling it protection." He looked toward Isobel, but he did not ask her to relieve him of the truth. Miss Henslow didn't withdraw. Her exhibit remains entered. If the committee suspends judgment while the beam is examined, the suspension applies to the evidence, not to her character. One of the judges shifted uncomfortably. The show steward opened the rulebook and confirmed that no entry could be removed without the exhibitor's written withdrawal or a formal vote based on proved misconduct. Neither existed. Henrietta was forced to accept the distinction. Isobel's fruit, grafting records, and inventory plans were restored to their places. Judging remained suspended, but her name was no longer absent from the board. Nicholas inclined his head to her from across the enclosure. She returned the acknowledgement and nothing more. Public correction mattered. It did not erase the fact that he had needed correction at all. By Monday afternoon, after the show had closed, Nicholas came to Elmstead by appointment. Lady Edith sat near the fire in the drawing room, within clear sight of the adjoining estate office. Mr. Cole arrived with the official Hatherleigh, marking hammer wrapped in oilcloth, and Mr. Wetherell brought a small iron evidence chest fitted with 2 locks. The head forester kept the hammer in his own hands until every witness named in Isobel's proposed protocol was present: the show steward, Elmstead's foreman, Mr. Cole, and Mr. Wetherell. Nicholas waited beside the table. He looked as though he had slept little. "Before we discuss the hammer," he said, "I owe you an apology that names the whole offense." Isobel remained standing. "Go on." I asked you to vanish from the judging enclosure. I told myself I was shielding you from ridicule, but I was shielding Hatherleigh from the sight of uncertainty. I placed my estate's comfort above your public dignity. I repeated the same harm I caused at Elmstead, only in gentler words. His voice did not waver. I don't expect forgiveness. Good, Isobel said quietly, because an apology isn't a receipt that purchases it. I understand. Do you? She looked toward the hammer in Mr. Cole's hands. Change must remain visible when it costs you control. Nicholas followed her gaze. That's why the hammer is here. Mr. Cole set the wrapped tool on the table, but did not uncover it yet. Nicholas addressed the witnesses. Hatherleigh won't retain sole custody of the instrument used to authenticate Hatherleigh marks. From today until the inquiry is concluded, it will be held under the system Miss Henslow designs. The show steward examined the iron chest. One lock would be held by him. The second key would remain with Mr. Wetherell. Any opening required both men, plus written notice to Elmstead's foreman and Hatherleigh's head forester. Isobel added that every comparison impression must be made on numbered blocks, witnessed, dated, and kept with the record. No person connected to either estate could conduct a private test. Mr. Cole unwrapped the hammer. Its chipped crown caught the grey afternoon light. Nicholas lifted it only long enough to place it inside the chest. As he lowered the iron head, Isobel saw a minute hesitation in his hand. This tool had once represented unquestioned authority. Now he was surrendering private command of it, because truth required a structure stronger than his word. She reached out and touched his wrist. The contact was brief, deliberate, and entirely her choice. Nicholas went still. He did not turn his hand beneath hers. He did not claim more than she offered. Trust isn't the hammer, Isobel said. It's whether you'll believe what it proves. Even if it proves Hatherleigh profited from fraud, he replied. Especially then. Then I will. She withdrew her fingers. Nicholas let the hammer settle into the chest. The show steward and Mr. Wetherell closed the lid, turned their separate keys, and signed the custody record. The official tool no longer belonged to silence. The young carter waited in the servants' hall, too frightened to enter the drawing room. His name was Daniel Reed, and he had worked for Mordaunt for 6 months. He admitted that he had seen Mordaunt remove tag E47 from Oak 47 3 nights before the show, but fear tightened his face whenever the word testimony was spoken. He'll dismiss me, Daniel said. No timber yard will hire a man called disloyal. Nicholas did not offer money for his statement. Your wages will continue through Hatherleigh until the inquiry is finished, he said. That payment is for lost employment, not for any answer you give. If you speak, you'll speak in your own words. If you refuse, the wages remain. Daniel looked at Isobel. And Elmstead, no one here will punish you for telling the truth, she said, but you mustn't repeat anything you didn't see. After a long silence, Daniel agreed to give a witnessed statement. He had seen Mordaunt at Oak 47. He had seen the tag removed. He had not seen where it went afterward. Isobel preserved the limit instead of pushing him beyond it. Before dusk, a messenger returned from Mordaunt's lodging in Winchester. The rooms were empty. His trunk had gone. The landlord said he had departed before dawn without leaving an address. Nicholas sent notice to the county authorities and to Hatherleigh's yards that Mordaunt no longer carried ducal authority. But he did not pretend absence proved guilt. Isobel ordered Oak 47 inspected immediately. She, Nicholas, Lady Edith, Mr. Cole, Elmstead's foreman, and Daniel travelled the short distance to the eastern wood in 2 estate carts. The oak stood untouched, but the brass tag was gone. Only 2 old nail holes remained in the bark. Mr. Wetherell's clerk brought the measurements recorded at the show. The spacing matched the 2 square nails still fastening E47 to the planted beam. Isobel pressed no hand to the trunk. She merely studied the empty holes and the fresh disturbance around them. "The tag was here," Daniel whispered. "Yes," she said, "and now its absence has become evidence." Mr. Cole bent to clear a line of fresh moss below the missing tag. Beneath it, another indentation showed in the bark. Not a complete crown, an older one. Its right point was missing. Nicholas looked from the mark to Isobel. The living tree carried the history of 2 different tools, one lawful, one false, and somewhere beyond Elmstead, Mordaunt was running from the proof he had failed to erase. By Thursday, the 4th of November, the first hard wind of the season had stripped enough leaves from Oak 47 to make its crown visible against the pale sky. It remained broad, balanced, and plainly alive. The show steward arrived at Elmstead shortly after 9 with Mr. Wetherell, the certified extract from the toll house register, and the custody record for the official Hatherleigh hammer, which remained locked inside the joint evidence chest. The sealed bark fragment stayed under the steward's control in Winchester. The planted beam and brass tag, E47, remained corded, waxed, and guarded at the show storage barn. Isobel had insisted that none of those objects be brought into the wood merely for convenience. Oak 47 could be examined where it stood. The evidence already in custody would remain where its movement had been recorded. Nicholas came with Mr. Cole, and Hatherleigh's assistant forester. Elmstead's foreman joined them, as did Daniel Reed, the young carter whose fear had not disappeared simply because he had agreed to speak. Lady Edith remained at the house, close enough to satisfy propriety when the party returned, but unwilling to turn a working inspection into a social procession. Isobel approached the oak carrying her field notes, a measuring rule, and no assumptions beyond what the bark could support. The newer mark was easy to see. Its crown was complete. Near its lower curve sat the faint crescent burr first preserved on the bark flake in September. Several inches below, where moss had been carefully lifted but not removed, lay the older impression. Its right crown point was absent. Mr. Cole crouched beside it. "That one is ours," he said. "I remember this section being inspected after a lightning strike 6 years ago. We marked the tree for pruning, not felling." "Why was a Hatherleigh mark used on Elmstead land?" Mr. Wetherell asked. The vendor's old boundary arrangement allowed joint inspection where branches threatened the Hatherleigh carriage road, Mr. Cole explained. The mark authorized removal of one damaged limb under the former owner's consent. It did not transfer ownership of the tree. His forester's daybook recorded the pruning and the date. The entry had never described the oak as salvage. Isobel compared the dimensions of both marks. The older crown was slightly worn by years of growth, but the missing right point remained unmistakable. The newer mark was sharper, deeper, and complete. "2 tools," she said, "used at different times for different purposes." Nicholas stood on the opposite side of the trunk. The lawful mark recorded a branch to be removed. The false mark reclassified the entire tree. "And the tag gave the false classification a lot number," Isobel replied. Daniel looked toward the 2 empty nail holes. "Mr. Mordaunt took it from there." His voice was quiet. "Don't look at me, lad," Mr. Wetherell said. "Look at the tree and tell us only what you saw." Daniel swallowed. "I saw him pull the nails. He wrapped the tag in cloth and put it in his coat." Did you see him attach it to the beam? Isobel asked. No, Miss Henslow. Did you see the beam that night? No. Then your statement must stop before either of those things. Mr. Wetherell glanced at her. The inference is strong. An inference can be stated as an inference. It mustn't be placed in his mouth as memory. Daniel looked at Isobel with startled gratitude. Nicholas said nothing, but she felt his attention settle upon her. She was protecting not merely the usefulness of the testimony, but the dignity of the frightened man giving it. The show steward recorded the visible condition of the oak. Mr. Cole and Elmstead's foreman signed beneath his description. A paper impression of each mark was taken without cutting the bark. The sheets were numbered, dated, and placed in separate envelopes. No one claimed that those impressions replaced the living tree. They merely documented what 6 witnesses had seen. Near noon, the toll-keeper arrived from the turnpike with the original bound register wrapped against the weather. He kept it in his own hands while Mr. Wetherell compared it with the certified extract. The entries matched. On the night Isobel's exhibition wagon disappeared, Mordaunt's blue timber wagon had passed the toll house toward the county show storage barn. It returned before dawn. The toll-keeper remembered the load because one rear wheel had required extra space at the gate. Could you see the cargo? Isobel asked. A beam under canvas, ma'am. I couldn't swear what wood it was. Did you see a brass tag? No. Again, Isobel refused to push certainty beyond sight. Daniel then gave his witnessed statement. He described Mordaunt entering Elmstead's eastern wood, removing tag E47, wrapping it, and ordering Daniel to drive the blue wagon toward Winchester on the following night. He admitted he had not known what waited at the yard until a beam was loaded beneath canvas. Mordaunt had instructed him not to record the cargo at the toll house. Did he say why? Nicholas asked. Daniel shook his head. Only that it was Hatherleigh business. Nicholas's expression hardened. It wasn't. The statement was written in plain language. When Mr. Wetherell's clerk suggested replacing Daniel's phrase, a bit frightened, with acting under coercion, Isobel stopped him. Write what he said. It's less forceful, the clerk objected. It's more truthful. Daniel signed with a hand that shook only once. Nicholas then signed a separate assurance that Daniel's temporary wages did not depend upon the content of his testimony. By the time the inspection ended, they had established a chain that no longer depended on Isobel's reputation alone. Oak 47 bore 2 marks. The official Hatherleigh tool could have made only the older one. Mordaunt had removed the tag. His wagon had carried a concealed beam toward the show barn. Daniel had driven it under instruction, yet the duplicate hammer remained missing. And without it, Mordaunt could still claim that another person had manufactured the false impression. On Friday afternoon, Nicholas returned to Elmstead to review the signed statements. The meeting took place in the morning room with both doors open. Lady Edith wrote letters in the adjoining drawing room. Isobel had spent most of the day outdoors and did not realize how cold her hands had become until Nicholas placed a cup of tea near her notes. No sugar, he said. She looked from the cup to him. You remembered. You take milk when it's strong and nothing when it isn't. The observation was small, almost domestic. It unsettled her more gently than flattery could have done. Nicholas took the chair across from her. He did not crowd the table or touch the papers without invitation. Daniel's statement will matter, he said, because he saw the tag removed. Because he was allowed to say only what he saw. Nicholas gave a faint nod. You protect truth even from people trying to strengthen it. Truth weakened by embellishment becomes another kind of lie. He looked toward the windows. The orchard beyond them had lost most of its leaves. I have begun to notice every room from which you are absent. The words came without ornament. Isobel's fingers tightened slightly around the teacup. Nicholas did not attempt to soften the admission or turn it into a request. That's a dangerous thing to say before trust is settled, she replied. I know. And yet you said it, because hiding it would be another form of arranging appearances. Isobel studied him over the rim of the cup. I've begun to measure your change less by what you say to me in private and more by what you permit others to see. That is fair. Her linen herbarium lay beside the field notes. Nicholas's gaze touched it, then returned to her. May I hold it? Isobel hesitated, not from fear that he would seize it, but because permission now carried emotional weight. She placed the book in his hands. Only the blossom page, only that page. He opened it carefully. The pressed apple blossom remained fixed beneath its protective paper. He read her aunt's sentence again and did not turn farther. His thumb rested on the worn linen cover, never touching the fragile petals. She would have liked Elmstead, he said. She would have criticized the drainage first. Then perhaps she would have liked me eventually. She distrusted charm, then I would have been forced to develop character. Isobel nearly smiled. Before she could answer, hurried steps crossed the hall. Elmstead's junior woodcutter entered after the footman, his cap crushed between both hands. Miss Henslow, I am sorry to disturb you. Men have been hired for the Eastern Wood. Isobel rose. Nicholas closed the herbarium and returned it directly to her. Whose men? She asked. Mr. Mordaunt's. They're gathering beyond the South Road tonight. The order is to enter before dawn and bring down Oak 47 as dangerous timber. The room lost all warmth. The duplicate hammer was still missing. The oak was the only living object that carried both marks. If Mordaunt destroyed it before the inquiry could be completed, he would not erase every clue. He would erase the clearest witness they had. Before dawn on Sunday, the 7th of November, a second warning reached Elmstead. Axes had already been carried into the Eastern Wood. Isobel was dressed within minutes. She did not send to Hatherleigh and wait for Nicholas to decide what should be done. She took the completed conveyance, Mr. Wetherell's written determination that no valid original timber license had been produced, Elmstead's foreman, 2 estate workers, and the solicitor's clerk, who had remained overnight after reviewing Daniel Reed's statement. Lady Edith dispatched a groom to Hatherleigh only after Isobel's cart had left the house. The eastern sky was beginning to grey when they reached the wood. The ground was wet enough to darken the hem of Isobel's skirt and pull at her boots. Ahead, the measured bite of axes sounded between the trees. Oak 47 stood in a clearing lit by 2 lanterns. 6 hired cutters had gathered around it. A shallow notch, no deeper than a man's thumb, marked the lower trunk beneath the 2 crown impressions. The living oak had not yet been seriously weakened, but the intention was unmistakable. Mr. Theodore Mordaunt stood beside a blue timber wagon with a folded paper in his hand. His expression sharpened when Isobel entered the clearing. "You're trespassing," she said. Mordaunt gave a short laugh. "On timber already conveyed to my syndicate, on Elmstead land." She handed the completed conveyance to the solicitor's clerk, who opened it where the seal and date could be seen. "This estate became mine on the 14th of October. You've produced no valid original license that survives the sale." Mordaunt lifted his paper. "I have a copy." a copy whose execution the vendor's solicitor cannot verify. Isobel held up Mr. Wetherell's written determination. Until an original is produced and examined, you have no authority to cut. The nearest workman lowered his axe slightly. Mordaunt noticed. You were hired under a lawful contract, he told the men. A woman's objection doesn't cancel it. Isobel stepped between the oak and the cutters. You are standing on my property after written notice that the license is disputed. I am ordering the work stopped. Her voice remained level. She did not look toward the road for rescue. No man here will be denied wages for work already performed this morning, but no further blow will be struck against that tree. One cutter glanced at the shallow notch. Another looked toward Mordaunt's wagon. Mr. Mordaunt said, His Grace backs the license, the oldest man said. His Grace suspended every lot connected to this contract. Isobel replied, You've been misled. Mordaunt moved closer. A woman cannot overrule an agreement backed by a duke. Hoofbeats entered the wood before Isobel could answer. Nicholas arrived with Mr. Cole and Lady Edith's groom, their horses damp from the hard ride across the 5 miles between the estates. He dismounted at once, but he did not stride in front of Isobel or demand control of the clearing. He stopped beside her. Mr. Mordaunt carries no Hatherleigh authority, he said. His words travelled cleanly through the cold morning. No contract bearing my name authorizes this cutting. Elmstead's proprietor has spoken. The cutters stepped away from the oak. Mordaunt's face changed. For the first time since Isobel had met him, respectability deserted him completely. You'll destroy Hatherleigh's credit for the word of a companion who bought more land than she understands. Nicholas did not answer the insult for her. Isobel did. I understand enough to know that healthy timber is worth more alive than falsely sold as ruin. Mordaunt turned toward the blue wagon. We're leaving. Elmstead's foreman moved to clear the horses' path, then stopped. Beneath the driver's bench sat a small iron tool chest secured by a heavy lock. Sawdust clung to its lid. A narrow strip of brass protruded from beneath one corner where the lid had not closed evenly. That chest wasn't on the wagon when it passed Elmstead last month, the foreman said. Mordaunt seized the reins. My tools are none of your concern. The solicitor's clerk stepped forward. The wagon and chest are present on Elmstead during a disputed entry for the purpose of felling a specifically contested tree. Their contents may be inventoried under witnesses pending direction from the county magistrates. They will not be privately taken or divided. You have no warrant, nor am I arresting you or claiming the goods, the clerk replied. I am recording objects brought onto Miss Henslow's land in connection with an alleged trespass. You may remain and state your objection for the inventory. Mordaunt's gaze moved from the clerk to Nicholas, then to Isobel. Calculation returned, stripped of polish. He dropped the reins, mounted the spare horse, tied behind the wagon, and wheeled it toward the southern track. Mr. Cole stepped aside, rather than risk a dangerous struggle among frightened animals. Nicholas called after him. Mordaunt, if you leave, your objection will still be recorded. Mordaunt did not look back. Hoofbeats broke through the trees and faded toward the road. No one pursued him. Nicholas sent the groom to notify the nearest county authority, and every Hatherleigh yard that Mordaunt no longer possessed permission to enter, contract, or command under the ducal name. The solicitor's clerk began the inventory with Isobel, Nicholas, Mr. Cole, Elmstead's foreman, and 2 cutters as witnesses. The chest remained where it was until each outer detail had been written down. Because Mordaunt had abandoned the key, The foreman opened the simple lock with a narrow estate tool while the clerk recorded the method. Inside lay spare brass lot tags bundled in cloth, a folded list of salvage payments, and an iron marking hammer. Mr. Cole lifted neither tool nor paper until the clerk had numbered them. Then, under witness, he turned the hammer face toward the lantern. The crown was complete. Beside its lower curve rose a tiny crescent burr. Isobel felt every earlier clue draw tight around the object. The fresh bark flake sealed in Winchester, the mark on the planted beam, the newer impression on oak 47, all carried the defect of this tool. This made the false mark, Mr. Cole said. It appears capable of making it, Isobel corrected, though her pulse beat hard. The witnessed comparison must still be done. Nicholas looked at her with something deeper than admiration. Even now, with the answer resting within reach, she would not let certainty outrun proof. The items were wrapped separately, sealed with the solicitor's clerk's wax, and signed across every fold by the witnesses. The counterfeit hammer, spare tags, and payment list entered neutral custody. The wagon remained at Elmstead until county direction could be obtained. No object was carried privately to Hatherleigh or placed in Isobel's personal possession. Only after the cutters had been dismissed with their morning wages. The clerk had left for Winchester with the sealed evidence under escort, and Mr. Cole had taken the other men toward the estate office. Did the clearing become quiet? Oak 47 still stood. The shallow notch in its trunk looked small from a distance, yet Isobel could not stop seeing how close the axes had come to destroying the only living surface that carried both marks. Her composure did not collapse dramatically. Her breath simply failed to settle. She pressed one muddy glove against the folded conveyance, as if paper could steady the weight of what had nearly been lost. Nicholas remained several paces away. "May I hold you?" he asked. Isobel looked at him. He had not arrived to command her land. He had not spoken over her. He had stood where she had already chosen to stand and made his authority answer to hers. She crossed the space between them. Nicholas opened his arms only when she stepped into them. The embrace was warm, firm, and restrained. Isobel held him in return, her cheek against the rough wool of his coat, listening to the breath he released, as though he had been holding it since the moment he saw the axes. "I was afraid the tree would be lost," he said quietly. "I was more afraid you would face him alone." "I did face him, yes." His arms did not tighten possessively, and I came to stand where you had asked me to stand, not where my title placed me. Isobel drew back enough to meet his eyes. "This time you did." There was no kiss. Relief had opened a door, but neither of them mistook an open door for permission to cross every threshold. When they returned to the sealed payment list later that morning, one entry stood apart from the rest. It named no full investor. It bore only 2 initials and a share. M. Quarter interest. By Tuesday, the 9th of November, Hatherleigh's timber yards had fallen nearly silent. Nicholas terminated Mordaunt's contract in writing before breakfast, suspended every disputed sale, and sent notices to buyers stating that ducal marks might have been misused. The wording did not conceal the risk to his own name. It also promised restitution to neighboring proprietors whose timber could be shown to have been taken or falsely classified. By noon, 2 creditors had requested meetings. One buyer had withdrawn from a winter order, and Hatherleigh's trustees were warning that honesty might cost more than the estate could presently bear. Nicholas listened to each objection without retreating. "If we continue paying wages while sales are stopped, The lower yards will exhaust their reserve before Christmas, one trustee said. Then the reserve must be replaced, Nicholas replied. From where? The London house can be leased. The sporting silver is unentailed and can be sold. The trustee stared at him. Your father collected those pieces for 30 years. My father also left roofs leaking over families who paid him rent. Nicholas signed the instruction. He did not write to Elmstead for assistance. He did not calculate what portion of Isobel's inheritance might solve Hatherleigh's difficulty more comfortably. Her fortune had purchased her freedom. He would not turn affection into another road by which his estate reached for it. Later that afternoon, Lady Henrietta Mortimer arrived at Hatherleigh Court without prior notice. She entered the trustee's room in a travelling dress of deep grey, composed enough to suggest she had come to offer sympathy rather than terms. You're creating panic among the buyers, she said, when the door had closed behind her and Nicholas's solicitor remained as witness. I'm informing them that the marks may be false. You're informing them that Hatherleigh cannot govern its own contractors. That may also be true. Henrietta's mouth tightened. You needn't ruin yourself to satisfy Miss Henslow's pride. This is not about pride. Everything is about pride when county society is watching. She placed a folded paper on the table. My father's bankers can restore the credit Mordaunt arranged. The winter wages can continue. The buyers can be reassured. Nicholas did not touch the paper. In exchange for what? The inquiry remains private. Mordaunt takes responsibility for the duplicate tool. My investment is not named. Miss Henslow's reputation is restored quietly, and everyone proceeds without further spectacle. Your investment. The words settled between them. Henrietta realized the admission too late. A minor financial interest. Nothing more. In timber falsely regraded as salvage. In an efficient contract, I did not supervise marks or wagons. Then you should welcome a public examination. Don't be naive, Nicholas. Truth is rarely improved by an audience. No, but concealment has been very profitable for yours. Henrietta rose. If you refuse this, Hatherleigh's losses are your choice. They already are. He pushed her paper back across the table. I won't buy solvency with silence. She left without another word. Before evening, her own steward requested a private interview with Nicholas's solicitor. The man arrived pale and carrying a narrow leather case. He said he had believed Lady Henrietta's payments concerned lawful salvage purchases. After hearing that county authorities were examining possible fraud and trespass, he no longer wished his name attached to accounts he had not understood. From the case, he produced a bank draft drawn from Henrietta's separate funds to Theodore Mordaunt, and a signed memorandum granting her a quarter interest in profits from regraded standing oak. The documents were not opened before Isobel in private. Nicholas's solicitor recorded their source, sealed them with the steward's statement, and arranged neutral custody beside the payment list recovered from Mordaunt's wagon. The following morning, a Winchester blacksmith examined the counterfeit crown and H hammer under the joint custody procedure Isobel had designed. The official Hatherleigh tool remained in its separate evidence chest. The blacksmith identified the recovered duplicate as the tool Mordaunt had commissioned 8 months earlier. He remembered the unusual order because Mordaunt had insisted the crown be complete and the face polished quickly. The tiny crescent burr had resulted from a flaw near the lower curve that Mordaunt refused to wait for him to correct. The blacksmith signed only what he could swear. He had made the tool. He had delivered it to Mordaunt. He could not say where it had been used. By Friday, the 12th of November, the evidence no longer formed a chain of suspicion. It formed a structure. Nicholas brought copies of the new statements to Elmstead, where Isobel reviewed them in the estate office with Mr. Wetherell and Lady Edith present. The originals remained sealed with the solicitor. Isobel read the quarter interest memorandum twice. Henrietta knew the profit depended on Standing Oak being regraded, she said. Her steward confirms the money. Mordaunt's payment list confirms the share. Nicholas stood across from her, his face drawn from 4 days of negotiations and little sleep. The timber buyers have agreed to attend a public comparison at Winchester on Monday. A comparison isn't enough by itself. No. The carter, toll-keeper, blacksmith, foresters, and show steward will be there. And Henrietta? She has been summoned by the Society Committee, whose funds and reputation she used. Isobel set down the copy. Will you present the case? No. Nicholas's answer came without hesitation. You found the first mark. You preserved the bark. You traced the tag and insisted on neutral custody when I asked you to disappear. The evidence should be presented by you. And where will you stand? Where you tell me. She studied him. Behind me, not because I need hiding, but because the witnesses must see that Hatherleigh won't interrupt when the evidence turns against it. Then I'll stand behind you. Do you trust me to finish even if the room becomes hostile? Yes. He took one breath. Do you trust me to remain there? Isobel considered everything he had done since the morning beneath Oak 47. He had exposed his estate to loss. He had rejected Henrietta's money. He had protected wages by sacrificing property that belonged to him alone. He had not touched Elmstead's funds, her authority, or the evidence without permission. Yes, she said. I do. The words changed something in his face, though he did not move nearer. Lady Edith suggested tea in the conservatory, then went ahead with Mr. Wetherell, leaving the glass-house passage visible from the adjoining room. Winter light fell through the panes in pale bars. Bare vines traced the walls, and the air held the clean scent of damp earth. Nicholas stopped several feet from Isobel. There is something I must say before Monday. Then say it. I won't use scandal, gratitude, protection, or Hatherleigh's need to claim affection from you. His voice was low and steady. Whatever happens at Winchester, you owe me nothing. Isobel's pulse quickened, but she held his gaze. That sounds like a promise. It is. He took no step toward her. May I kiss you? The question carried no assumption. No rank stood inside it. Only a man who had learned that desire did not become honorable until choice answered it. Yes, Isobel said. She crossed the final distance herself. One hand rose to his cheek. Nicholas waited until her touch settled before he bent toward her. The kiss was slow, restrained, and warm enough to make the cold glass house disappear. He did not seize her waist or deepen the moment beyond what she offered. Isobel chose the closeness. She chose the gentle pressure of her mouth against his. When she drew back, she left her palm against his face. Nicholas's eyes remained closed for one heartbeat before he looked at her. I have wanted to do that since before I deserved to ask, he said. You were wise to wait. It may be the first wise thing I've done without your instruction. A quiet smile touched her mouth. Don't grow vain. I wouldn't dare. He covered no part of her hand. He let it rest where she had placed it. I won't ask anything about your future until the truth is public. Isobel lowered her hand, not because she regretted the kiss, but because the promise deserved to stand without being softened. Then on Monday, Your Grace, stand behind me. I will. Beyond the glass, the Elmstead orchard waited under bare branches. At Winchester, 2 hammers, 1 living oak, and a trail of witnesses were waiting too. On Monday, the 15th of November, the covered timber yard at Winchester filled before the auction bell had finished sounding. Stacked beams formed dark aisles beneath the roof. Foresters stood beside timber buyers, estate owners, carters, and members of the County Agricultural Society. At the center, beneath the raised auction platform, a long table held 2 locked evidence chests, the sealed bark sleeve, the planted oak beam, the brass tag E47, and 7 numbered blocks of fresh pine. The official Hatherleigh crown and H hammer remained inside the joint custody chest. The counterfeit hammer recovered from Mordaunt's wagon lay sealed in the second. The show steward held 1 key. Mr. Wetherell held the other. Neither chest could be opened without both men. Lady Edith sat near the front. Nicholas stood several feet behind Isobel, exactly where she had asked him to stand. He wore no ducal ribbon and occupied no platform. Lady Henrietta Mortimer stood with 2 agricultural committee members, her face composed beneath a dark bonnet. Theodore Mordaunt had been located at an inn north of Winchester and served notice by the county magistrates. He stood beside his solicitor, pale with anger, but still determined to appear respectable. Isobel waited until the yard settled. Then she placed one hand upon her field notes. "This inquiry concerns a mark used to declare living trees worthless," she said. "It also concerns who profited when those declarations were believed." The show steward opened the first chest. Mr. Cole identified the official Hatherleigh hammer by its worn handle, estate inventory number, and broken right point. He confirmed that the tool had remained under 2-key custody at Hatherleigh until its later transfer into neutral custody. A numbered pine block was placed upon the table. In full view of the witnesses, Mr. Cole struck the block once. The crown and H appeared cleanly, but the right point of the crown was missing. A clerk carried the block along the front row, so the buyers could see the defect. Isobel said, "Every lawful Hatherleigh mark made during the past 7 years carries that absence." The second chest was opened. The Winchester blacksmith identified the recovered hammer as the tool Mordaunt had commissioned 8 months earlier. "He asked for a full crown," the man said. "He would not wait for me to remove a flaw near the lower curve." The counterfeit hammer struck a second numbered block. Its crown was complete. Beside the lower curve appeared a tiny crescent burr. A murmur moved through the yard. Mordaunt's solicitor rose. "The making of a tool proves nothing about its use." "Agreed," Isobel said. "That is why the tool is only 1 link." The show steward lifted the sealed parchment sleeve. The signatures of the auctioneer and vendor's solicitor remained intact across the fold. He broke the seal before the witnesses and removed the bark flake Isobel had found beneath Oak 47 on the 15th of September. The fragment was placed beside the second pine block. The partial crown was complete where visible. The same crescent burr marked its lower edge. Isobel presented the field sketch she had made before the bark was sealed. This drawing records the location and appearance of the fragment when found. It supports the chain, but it does not replace the physical evidence. The planted oak beam was brought forward under its original show seals. Its perfect crown and matched the counterfeit impression. The brass tag E47 remained attached by 2 square nails driven through older holes. The show steward confirmed that neither beam nor tag had left neutral custody since the county show. Mr. Cole and Elmstead's foreman then testified regarding Oak 47. The tree remained alive in Elmstead's eastern wood. It bore an older chipped crown from a lawful pruning inspection and a newer complete crown with the crescent burr. The 2 empty nail holes in its bark matched the spacing of the nails fastening E47 to the planted beam. "The beam cannot be oak 47, Isobel said. "The living tree still stands. The tag was removed from it and fixed to another piece of timber. The false mark and transferred number created a false identity." Mordaunt stepped forward. "Subcontractors handled the wagons. Tags are moved. Records contain errors. Miss Henslow has built an accusation from ordinary disorder." "Then we will examine the movement," Isobel replied. The toll-keeper brought the original bound register and kept it in his own hands while the relevant entries were read. Mordaunt's blue wagon had travelled toward the county show storage barn on the night Isobel's exhibition wagon disappeared. It carried a covered beam and returned before dawn. Daniel Reed then gave his statement. His voice shook at first, but Isobel did not interrupt. He had seen Mordaunt remove tag E47 from the living oak. He had driven the blue wagon under Mordaunt's instruction. He had seen the beam loaded beneath canvas. He had been told not to describe the cargo at the toll house. "Did Miss Henslow offer you money for this evidence?" Mordaunt's solicitor asked. "No, sir." "Did His Grace?" "He continued my wages whether I spoke or not." Nicholas's written assurance was entered into the record. The blacksmith confirmed direct delivery of the duplicate hammer to Mordaunt. The payment list recovered from Mordaunt's wagon was opened next. It named salvage payments, wagon fees, and a quarter interest marked only by the initials HM. Lady Henrietta's steward presented the bank draft and memorandum from her separate funds. The memorandum valued profits from regraded standing oak. Henrietta remained composed. "I invested in a lawful timber concern. I did not instruct Mr. Mordaunt to counterfeit marks. The question is not whether you held the hammer," Isobel said. "The question is whether you understood the source of the profit." She placed the memorandum beside the false salvage schedule. Healthy trees were purchased at the value of ruin, then sold as sound timber. Your quarter interest increased only when standing oak was regraded. Henrietta's control broke. You would never have understood any of this had you remained where you belonged. Silence fell so quickly that the creak of the roof timbers became audible. Isobel did not answer at once. The opening insult had returned, but now it had exposed the speaker rather than diminished the woman. Nicholas stepped forward only then. He did not move in front of Isobel. He stopped beside the evidence table. "I once told Miss Henslow to know her place," he said. Every face turned toward him. "I had not yet learned mine. My place is not before her testimony, nor above it, but answerable for every authority I lent to this fraud." He looked toward the buyers, workers, and landowners whose trust Hatherleigh had endangered. "I dismissed her expertise because admitting uncertainty embarrassed me. My contract enabled Mr. Mordaunt. At the county show, I asked Miss Henslow to disappear again and called it protection. Hatherleigh will make restitution for every converted tree proved through these records. The financial cost is mine. The shame is also mine." He turned to Isobel. "Please," she did. Isobel presented a transparent marking protocol, requiring separate estate inventories, 2 witnesses for every mark, numbered removal receipts, neutral custody of disputed tools, and written authority before any wagon crossed a boundary. The timber buyers accepted a corrected catalogue. 3 neighboring proprietors submitted claims for review. The County Agricultural Society restored Elmstead's suspended exhibit, and entered Isobel's orchard and timber protocol under her own name. Lady Henrietta was removed from the Society's patronage committee before the meeting ended. Her investment was placed under review for restitution where legally recoverable. Mordaunt's contract was terminated, his county trading privileges withdrawn, and the evidence transferred to the magistrates for proceedings concerning fraud, converted timber, and trespass. His sureties were called. He did not leave with the dignity he had borrowed from other people's silence. When the last witnesses had gone, Nicholas met Isobel in a small office beside the auction platform. Lady Edith waited in the adjoining room with the door open. Nicholas stood before Isobel without rehearsed charm. "I love you, Isobel," he said, "not because you saved Hatherleigh, and not because you forgave me. I love the truth of you, even when that truth requires me to become better than I was." Isobel took both his hands. "I love you too, Nicholas, but I will never accept a love that needs me to be smaller." His fingers closed gently around hers. "Nor will I offer one." She rose onto her toes and kissed him once, freely and without hesitation. When she drew back, he did not ask for marriage, gratitude, or a promise shaped by the day's emotion. They agreed only to a proper courtship. At the doorway, Nicholas paused. "May I call at Elmstead on Thursday?" Isobel looked at the two hammers being sealed again beyond the office window. "You may." A hint of warmth entered her eyes. "Bring no hammer, Your Grace." Nicholas called at Elmstead on Thursday without a hammer, without an argument prepared in advance, and without assuming that one public confession had completed the work of becoming trustworthy. Winter settled over Hampshire in measured stages. The orchards emptied. Frost silvered the eastern wood. Carriages moved more slowly along the 5 miles between Hatherleigh Court and Elmstead Park. Yet Nicholas continued his visits according to every form propriety required. His calling card arrived before he entered. Lady Edith or another suitable companion remained nearby. He invited Isobel to formal dinners where her place was named, without apology, and to estate meetings where her judgment was recorded rather than borrowed. She accepted some invitations and declined others. He learned that affection did not make every answer yes. Their courtship grew through letters, chaperoned walks, shared accounts, and conversations that did not always end in agreement. The most serious disagreement came in February, when Nicholas proposed expanding a profitable timber nursery across part of Elmstead's oldest orchard. Hatherleigh needed a lawful source of future income, and Elmstead's soil was suitable. "The western rows are producing less each year," he said, over a table spread with planting plans. A managed nursery could support both estates without cutting mature woodland. Isobel studied the drawing. It would also remove trees planted by families who worked here before either of us was born. "I'm not proposing sentiment as policy, nor am I proposing memory as an excuse for neglect." His expression tightened. "Then, what are you proposing?" "That we stop speaking as though profit and preservation cannot occupy the same map." The old Nicholas might have answered quickly enough to win. The man before her looked again at the plan. "Show me." Together they marked the healthiest heritage rows for protection and assigned neglected southern acreage to a commercial nursery. Isobel required separate accounts. Nicholas asked for shared standards of inspection. Neither withdrew in wounded silence. Neither commanded. When the revised plan was complete, he looked at the two sections divided by a clean line of ink. "I thought partnership would feel more agreeable." Agreement without disagreement is only obedience wearing a pleasant coat. Then I'm relieved we've failed so completely. She smiled. You are improving. By March, Mordaunt's sureties had begun paying restitution into accounts, supervised by the county solicitors. Proceedings concerning converted timber, fraud, and trespass remained before the magistrates, but he no longer traded under any respectable estate's name. Lady Henrietta's investment had been entered into the restitution inquiry, where the law permitted recovery. She remained removed from the Agricultural Society and from every committee that could control another exhibitor's work. Nicholas never used either consequence as courtship entertainment. When he spoke of the matter, he spoke of repaired wages, corrected accounts, and the neighboring proprietors who'd received payment for timber wrongly taken. One cold afternoon near the end of March, he asked Isobel to walk with him through the old orchard. Lady Edith followed at a discreet distance with the housekeeper. Nicholas stopped beneath an apple tree whose first buds had not yet opened. He held no audience with him and carried no family jewel meant to turn consent into ceremony. Isobel, he said, I have spent months learning how much of love is waiting for an answer that may not serve me. She met his eyes. That sounds uncomfortable. Frequently. His smile faded into something steadier. I don't want Elmstead absorbed into Hatherleigh. I don't want your judgment hidden beneath my title. I want a life in which we remain answerable to one another, without either of us becoming smaller. He drew one breath. Will you marry me? Isobel did not answer at once. Nicholas waited. That patience, more than the question, told her how far he had travelled from the man who had once assigned her place before a crowd. Yes, she said, I will. Relief moved across his face, but he did not reach for her until she extended her hand. Then he lifted it and kissed her knuckles through her glove. Their marriage settlement was drafted in April by separate solicitors. Elmstead was placed under trustees for Isobel's separate use. Its rents, management, and future income remained protected. No Hatherleigh debt could be charged against it merely because she married the Duke. Every joint project required written consent from both estates. Nicholas accepted each clause without treating caution as insult. I'm not marrying you to become poor-in-law, Isobel told him while reviewing the final draft. And I'm not marrying you to become rich by access, he replied. The documents were signed and sealed before the banns were read. In May of 1853, the parish church at Elmstead, filled with tenants, workers, neighbouring proprietors, and the witnesses who had seen truth restored one piece at a time. Lady Edith stood near the front, openly weeping now and making no attempt to blame the light. Isobel walked to Nicholas by her own choice. When she became Duchess of Hatherleigh, she did not cease to be Isobel Henslow, proprietor of Elmstead Park. After the service, she signed the register in a hand as steady as the one that had purchased the estate 8 months earlier. Nicholas signed beside her, not over her name. The celebration was generous, but not grand enough to turn their vows into county spectacle. By late afternoon, the guests had gone, the final carriage had passed through the drive, and the newly married couple escaped with a small picnic basket to the eastern orchard. Oak 47 stood beyond the apple rows, its crown full beneath the spring sky. The shallow notch left by Mordaunt's cutters remained visible near the base. A rim of new growth had begun to form around it, but the wound had not vanished. Neither had the two marks. The old chipped crown and the newer false one remained in the bark as separate records of what had been authorized and what had been imposed. Isobel sat on a folded rug beneath the tree. Nicholas settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. But he waited while she opened the linen-bound herbarium. Her aunt's pressed apple blossom rested on the first page, faded to ivory and still protected beneath thin paper. A fresh blossom drifted from the orchard and landed near Isobel's skirt. She lifted it carefully and placed it on the facing page. Nicholas watched without reaching. "The pencil is in the basket," she said. He found it and held it out. Isobel considered him, then placed the herbarium across both their knees. "Write the date." He did. Beneath the fresh blossom, Nicholas wrote May 1853 in a small, careful hand. He returned the pencil. "Isobel," added Elmstead Park and Hatherleigh Court beneath it. The names stood on the same page, joined by the moment but not merged into one. Their hands met over the open spine. Nicholas turned his palm upward. This time Isobel did not hesitate. She placed her hand in his, and their fingers closed together with the ease of something chosen many times and never assumed. "I love you," he said. There was no crowd to hear him and no shame to reverse. Only the orchard, the living oak, and the woman beside him. Isobel looked at the two blossoms facing one another across the page. "I know," she said. Then she turned toward him. "And I love you." She lifted one hand to his cheek and kissed him before he could ask. Nicholas answered with equal tenderness, one hand remaining joined with hers over the herbarium. Above them, Oak 47 carried both marks, but neither mark determined its living worth.